Gonzaga is absolutely capable of taking home the $1 million prize from the Players Era Festival, but the team's first two matchups, well, they're not going to make it easy.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Randy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances using Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com, and you'll get 50% off your first year. Well, folks, Seattle University, the Redhawks, are officially part of the West Coast Conference as of July 1st. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about their basketball history, their recent success, what this means for the conference. Close out the show. But before we get to that, we're going to talk about the Players Era Festival as they have released the matchups for the first 2 days of the event. And we're going to talk about who Gonzaga is playing, what this means for them for their final game of the event. And we're going to talk a little bit about the logistics of this event as it is new for Gonzaga and with that $1 million prize and the $1 million paid to every single player, every single team. We're going to talk about what that means in the post-house settlement era. We're also going to talk about Gonzaga's non-conference schedule at large and what it means for the team now that we know that they are going to be playing Alabama and Maryland are the first two games for Gonzaga in the Players Era Festival. They will play Alabama on Monday, November 24th. So it is feast week, but it is the very beginning of feast week. Monday, November 24th, 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. Gonzaga will take on Nate Oates and the Alabama Crimson Tide. We do not know the location of the game specifically yet. It will likely be, I think it will guaranteed be either at the Michelob Ultra Arena or the MGM Garden Grand Arena, both, of course, in Las Vegas. We don't know TV stuff yet, although it sounds like Warner Brothers Discovery has the rights to this event. So that means probably TBS, TNT, or maybe HBO Max for those games. We'll obviously release that information when we have it. So Gonzaga starts against Alabama. They'll also play Maryland the next day, same time, Tuesday, November 25th, 6:30 p.m. Pacific time against Maryland. Again, also do not know the location or the TV information for that. We'll start with Bama. We're just going to give a very quick about these two teams before we talk more about the event at large, because we just don't know a ton about these two teams yet. We'll obviously give you much bigger previews of these teams when we get closer to said event. Alabama's 14th in CBS's top 25 rankings and 17th in John Rothstein's rankings. For reference, Gonzaga is 21st and 18th. So both spots have Alabama slightly higher than Gonzaga at this point. The Crimson Tide lose key pieces, Cliff Omoruyi, Mark Sears, Grant Nelson among the big pieces gone for that team. But they keep a really talented backcourt. Latrell Wrightsell, Houston Millette from Pepperdine are both in the mix. Aiden Holloway, LeBaron Philon comes back after a very good freshman year. They also had Miami transfer Jaleel Bethea. Front court's a little less proven, so it probably a matchup of Bama's guards versus Gonzaga's bigs. Should be a fun one to see how that shakes out. And then on Tuesday, they take on Maryland. Maryland's unranked by CBS. They're 35th in John Rothstein's top 45 rankings. Maryland, tough team to pin down right now because they went through a coaching change. Kevin Willard left Maryland for Villanova, you may recall, because this happened literally during the Sweet 16. Players for Maryland found out their coach was leaving before their Sweet 16 game. Not an ideal way for that to go down. Regardless, he's at Nova. Maryland hires Buzz Williams from Texas A&M. Williams had a lot of success at A&M, so I think this Maryland team is going to be just fine. And also maybe a new look roster for the Terps, but there's going to be some familiar faces for Gonzaga fans. Miles Rice, former Washington State guard who spent last year at Indiana. He's going to likely start in the backcourt alongside Isaiah Watts, who was also at Washington State last year. So pair of Cougs in the backcourt for Coach Williams and the Terps. They also have Elijah Saunders, who's from Seattle, went to San Diego State, and then also spent last year at Virginia. Maryland also has Alex Alston, an incoming freshman who Gonzaga recruited at one point. So some familiar faces on that Maryland roster, but they're a really difficult team to make any assumptions about at this point because they have not played a game together yet and have a entirely new roster. Gonzaga will get 3 games out of the Players Era Festival. They will play a game on Wednesday, November 26th. We just do not know the opponent or the time or anything about said game. This is from the article written by Matt Norlander at CBS, kind of describing how this event works, because there's 18 teams. And a lot of teams are going to go 2-0 on Monday and Tuesday. So the way that Norlander wrote it, he says, teams that go 2-0 on Monday and Tuesday will pool into the championship round on Wednesday. Point differential, total points scored, and points allowed will all affect the tally and serve as tiebreakers, just like in 2024. So for Gonzaga, getting 2 tough games and their first 2 matchups is a slight disadvantage, because the likelihood that Gonzaga will have a super high point differential against teams like Alabama and Maryland, even if they go 2-0, they're probably not going to have a huge point differential. Maybe they will, but it's more difficult than if you were to play, like, let's say, UNLV and Notre Dame, who are both in this event, or St. Joe's, or some of the other teams that are in this event that maybe aren't going to be as competitive as teams like Maryland and Alabama. So for Gonzaga, if they just blasted the doors off the first 2 teams they played, they're more likely to be in that championship game on Wednesday. Whereas if they beat 2 really good teams in Bama and Maryland, but don't do it by a significantly high margin, they probably won't get as advantageous of a seed or a matchup for that third game on Wednesday. We'll see how it all shakes out. It's just a tricky dynamics with an 18-team event. It's not overall that big of a deal for Gonzaga. The importance of this is getting some quality early season games, and they're going to get that regardless with Alabama and Maryland. Hopefully that third game ends up being somebody quality as well, but it'll be up to how Gonzaga plays in those first 2 games. So again, a little bit more about this event. 18 teams, every team is playing 3 games. Each team gets $1 million for participating. And the winning team will also get $1 million. So if Gonzaga wins the whole thing, they get $1 million plus another $1 million on top of that. People were concerned about this event last year. For what it's worth, every single check that was cashed last year cleared. There is no real reason to assume that that money is not legitimate or anything like that. But now with the House settlement coming into effect, it does change the dynamics for this a little bit. Not a ton, because last year that payout, that money that went to each program that participated, went to the school, and then the school allocated that money to the players. So that's not really going to change. What does change is how the school determines what specifically to do with that money with regards to their ability to pay student athletes directly. Let me explain. Every school has $20.5 million that they are allowed to spend on their student athletes directly. That is new as of July 1st via the House settlement. Many programs will not have the full $20.5 million. I feel fairly comfortable in including Gonzaga in the list of programs that are not going to have $20.5 million to spend. This money that Gonzaga will get from participating, and even the extra million if they were to win it, can just be tossed into that rev share cap. So if Gonzaga has $9 million and they make $1 million or they make $2 million on this event, they can just throw that into their rev share cap because they're not hitting that $20.5 million. From there, they can allocate that money however they want. In theory, they would obviously allocate it to their men's basketball players, but that is what they're allowed to do if they make that money part of their rev share cap. I would assume that Gonzaga is planning to do that. That would be my assumption at this point. In fact, Norlander had a quote from a coach that was anonymous who basically said that's their plan. I don't know if it was Mark Few or the Zags, but again, there are other programs in here, Syracuse and St. Joe's and UNLV and other smaller programs that probably are going to be doing something similar as well. Now, if you're a program that already has that cap amount of money, like Alabama, for example, you already have that $20.5 million. This money that you win, or this money that you get, whether you win or not, then has to go through that NIL Go, which we talked about on Monday's show. That's the kind of the new system that's set up where there's going to be a college sports commission, this group that evaluates NIL payments and determines whether they're legitimate, basically, whether the players are getting fair market for these deals, whether anybody's trying to kind of cheat the system to just be able to pay a player a bunch of money. So if a program, again, we'll use Bama as the example, if they have to send their winnings here through the NIL Go system, that'll be an interesting kind of litmus test for folks to kind of evaluate and see how this system is working. And it'll be interesting to see if teams, because another rule here is the coaches do not have to spend this money evenly on their team. Gonzaga does not have to take their $1 million and allocate the exact same amount to every player on the roster. They're not beholden to that. And if Gonzaga is just throwing this money in the rev share, they can give all $1 million to Graham Ike if they want. They're not going to do that, but there's nothing stopping them from doing that if they're putting the money in the rev share. If I'm trying to go through the NIL Go system, though, if I'm Alabama and I submit, all of my different payments or my different NIL deals through the system, and these people at NIL Goes or these people at the College Sports Commission see that I'm trying to pay LeBaron Philon $700,000 and I'm trying to pay Houston Millett $25,000, they may flag that. They may say, no, this doesn't work because they're both being asked to do the same thing. Philon and Millett are both signing autographs for the same amount of time. They're both posting the same amount of things on social media. They're both going to the same speaking events. So you cannot say that LeBaron Philon deserves $675,000 more dollars than Houston Millett. If your only argument is he's more important to our team, that's paying for play. We don't allow that. So that's something to keep an eye on. Again, those numbers are obviously extreme for a reason. It's more likely that a team that's going through NIL Go will allocate their money very similarly. Maybe the starters make a little bit more than the backups. I don't know, whatever they figure out. But if this goes off without a hitch, if the NIL Go system does not flag any of these payments, that opens up a huge potential avenue for this event to grow. It wants to be 32 teams next year. If this doesn't trip it up, I could see that happening. If it does and it causes a bunch of headaches, then I'm curious what will happen going forward. Again, I think most of that's not super relevant for Gonzaga because they're going to take whatever money they make and they're going to toss it into their rev share, and it's just going to be some added income that they can allocate however they want because it's not beholden to the NIL Go checks and balances system. Well, folks, we're going to continue to talk about this. We're going to continue to talk about Gonzaga's non-conference schedule in particular because Bama and Maryland are two really good programs to add to what is already an excellent non-con for Mark Few's club. We're going to talk about that and whether there's going to be any more potential marquee additions coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go? Because between dining out and online shopping and just general entertainment costs, it's pretty easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it is a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. And instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan your long-term goals. It's so critical for us as a family. My wife and I, we love to make sure that we're on the same page when it comes to our finances, especially with our young child. And thankfully with Monarch Money, it's just easier and smoother than ever before. You can track both your shared and personal accounts, set collective goals together, and stay on the same page without all the added stress and hassle. So take control of your finances by using Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com and you'll get 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still talking Gonzaga's non-conference schedule. We talked about the 2 additions to Gonzaga's schedule, or at least I should say the 2 known matchups as part of the Players Era Festival taking place in Las Vegas in the first part of Feast Week, Thanksgiving week in late November. We now know Gonzaga will take on Alabama on Monday, November 24th, and Maryland, on November 25th. And those 2 teams are added to what is already a very competitive non-conference slate for Mark Few and the Zags. We're going to go through what we know on the schedule up to this point, including what the matchup could be for Gonzaga's 3rd and final game in Las Vegas as part of the Players Era Festival. And then we're going to take a look at what's next, who might be added, whether we might see a marquee February matchup, which we've seen in the past, and kind of what the rest of the schedule might end up looking like. So here's what we know so far. On November 8th, Gonzaga will take on Porter Moser's Oklahoma Sooners. Boomer Sooner in the SEC. This game taking place in the Spokane Arena. First of what I expect to be a home-and-home series. So the second game, return game, will be next year in Oklahoma, whether it's on campus for the Sooners or somewhere else nearby, as this game is obviously being played at the arena. Regardless, Gonzaga is going to effectively host Oklahoma this year and then play them on the road next year. Not a lot of history between Gonzaga and Oklahoma, but this is a program that has historically scheduled pretty weak in the non-con in the last 2 years. I think they've lost one combined game in the non-conference, but they have struggled in conference play last year in the SEC, the year before that in the Big 12. So you can see Coach Moser's trying to schedule a more competitive non-conference. I think they already added Marquette to their non-con and now adding Gonzaga as well. That's going to be a fun early season test for both clubs. Then 3 days later, Gonzaga will take on Creighton, Greg McDermott, and the Blue Jays. This is also the first of a home-and-home series, so that means that next year Gonzaga will have road games in the non-conference against both Oklahoma and Creighton. Always good to have a couple road games on the schedule, but also always fun to have these games at home. We're expecting this game on the 11th will be at the Kennel, so it'll be very cool for Gonzaga to have a top 25 caliber team in Creighton. Don't know if they'll actually be top 25 at that point, but right around that and having them coming to Spokane to play at the Kennel is always very cool. And then after that, the next known games on the schedule are the two matchups in the Players Era Festival, Alabama and Maryland. Again, November 24th, 25th, both games at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. And then on November 26th, that Wednesday, Gonzaga will play their third and final game. We do not know who it is against, and we can't really speculate even who it'll be against because it depends on how Gonzaga does and how everybody else does in this tournament. But here are the teams that it could theoretically be played against. That would be Auburn, Creighton, who of course Gonzaga's already seen, and Baylor, by the way. So two teams that Gonzaga's already seen this season. Auburn, Creighton, Baylor, Houston, Iowa State, Kansas, Michigan, Notre Dame, Oregon, Rutgers, San Diego State, St. John, Syracuse, Tennessee, and UNLV. So obviously some not so great teams in there. I think Gonzaga would be a little disappointed if it ended up being Notre Dame or Rutgers or UNLV. But if you could get a Houston, if you could get a Kansas, a Michigan, Oregon, Auburn, San Diego State even. I mean, there's a lot of St. John's would be incredible. Like there's a pretty good chance if you just were to throw a dart at one of those teams that you're going to match up against somebody that would be very ideal and advantageous for Gonzaga to be playing in late November. Next known game on the schedule is December 5th. Gonzaga heading out to the Bridgestone Arena in Nashville, Tennessee to take on Mark Pope and the Kentucky Wildcats. That's game 4 in a 6-game series agreed to when John Calipari was the head coach at Kentucky. The Zags are up 2-1 in that series. They beat Coach Cal twice, are 0-1 against Mark Pope, having lost last year at Climate Pledge Arena. About a week later, Gonzaga takes on UCLA at the Climate Pledge Arena. That's game 2 in a 2-year series. Gonzaga lost last year to UCLA at the Intuit Dome, so hoping to get a little revenge here in Seattle. And then Gonzaga's got matchups against Baylor and Arizona State. We do not have dates for those games yet. Gonzaga will take on Baylor likely at a neutral site after hosting Baylor at the Spokane Arena last year. We're expecting this game to be on a neutral site, and then the third game as a part of a 3-year series will be in Waco. The Zags are up, of course, 1-0 in this series after beating the absolute doors off Baylor last year in the first game of the season. And then Gonzaga will play Arizona State on the road this year. We do not know when that game will take place, but it will take place in Tempe after Gonzaga hosted Arizona State at the Kennel this last year and beat them. It was a pretty close game, but they ended up winning that one by about 8. So that's what we have so far for Gonzaga's schedule. In terms of who could be added, I'm still keeping an eye on Washington, but I will say, as I'm recording just a few hours ago, Washington scheduled a home-and-home series with Baylor, and they will be playing in Waco this year. I have a feeling Danny Sprinkle and the Huskies aren't going to play too many true road games in their non-conference slate. It's not even a dig at them as much as most teams don't play very many true road games. And since this series is supposed to pick up again in Spokane, something tells me Washington is not re-upping the series this year. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong, but I have a feeling that that game's not happening this season. Also curious if we're going to get another February marquee matchup. We've seen those for Gonzaga in the past, usually against John Calipari teams. So maybe it'll be Arkansas. That would make the third different team that Gonzaga has played in February against John Calipari in a non-conference matchup, as they did it at Memphis and they did it at Kentucky. It'd be fun to see them do it with Arkansas here, if that is something that Arkansas can squeeze into the schedule. We're seeing more of these getting scheduled. Duke and Michigan are playing each other. Baylor and Louisville are playing in a February game. We've seen a handful of these big time matchups get scheduled. It won't be a Big Ten team because they have a 20-game conference schedule, but the other marquee conferences could all, in theory, make this work. Arkansas is a team I'd be keeping an eye on. Tennessee and Ole Miss. Rick Barnes and Chris Beard are coaches that Mark Few's worked with in the past, so maybe they could make something happen. Who knows? Maybe Memphis could get on the schedule. Like, there's a lot of different things that could, in theory, happen in a February matchup if Gonzaga is able to make it work. However, I think ultimately the majority of the rest of Gonzaga's non-conference slate that has yet to be filled out is going to be bye games. It's going to be your Idahos, your Montanas, your Long Beach States, your UMass Lowells, Bucknell, the types of teams that Gonzaga has played over the last couple of years. The majority of the rest of the games are going to be that. And every time an announcement comes out and it's a team like that, I know people are like, oh, fine. But this already is a phenomenal schedule. Oklahoma, Creighton, Alabama, Maryland, Kentucky, UCLA, Baylor, Arizona State. That is ridiculous. Yes, Arizona State's not great. Yes, Oklahoma is kind of mediocre, but Kentucky, UCLA, I think this Baylor team's going to be good. Creighton's always good. Alabama's going to be a top 15, top 20 team. Maryland, I think, has some serious upside. This is a darn good schedule that's already come together. And even if it's filled out primarily or entirely with bye game type opponents from here on out, this is still going to really challenge Mark Few and that very young, inexperienced, at least playing together backcourt that this Gonzaga team has heading into next season. Well, folks, Seattle U, they are officially joining the WCC. It has happened. They are members of the conference. They've won 20-plus games, 3 of the last 4 seasons. Can this team compete right away? More on that coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, closing out the show with the news that on July 1st, 2025, the Seattle University Redhawks officially became members of the West Coast Conference. Obviously not a surprise, was a known fact that this was going to happen for over a year now, but since it is the official date, or at least as I'm recording this, it's the official date. As you're listening, it is a day later, as Seattle U is now officially in the WCC. And as a reminder, we'll go through the history a bit here. This team was one of the original, or at least one of the very early members of the WCC, as they were a part of the conference from 1971 till 1980. So about a decade they spent in the WCC. At the time, it was called the WCAC, which is part of the reason that maybe people don't know that they were part of the original WCC back at the time. But then Seattle U opted to drop out of the Division I level in 1980, a move that has really backed up this program's athletic accomplishments. Unfortunately for Seattle U, they are still trying to kind of climb out of the hole that this decision kind of cost them way back over 40 years ago at this time now. As they stayed at the non-D1 level all the way until 2009 was when they finally came back up to the D1 level, and they returned as an independent program in 2009 and were independent for 3 years before they joined the Western Athletic Conference, the WAC. RIP, by the way, to the WAC, as they've now merged with the ASUN to become the UAC conference. Regardless, Seattle U was in the WAC for a little over a decade, starting in 2012, 2013 until now, until this upcoming season, or this last season, which was their final season as a member of the WAC. So that's kind of Seattle U's history. Their president had a nice kind of comment in a press release that basically said, we always envisioned ourselves in the WCC, and like we left D1 as a member of the WCC, and when we came back to D1, our goal was always to be in the WCC, and it didn't happen right away, but we always, this is always what we wanted. And I'm somebody, I worked at Seattle U. I've said this on the show. I was a grad student there, and I also worked there after grad school, and that was early in their time as a D1 school, and this was always their goal. They were very adamant of like, we want to get into the WCC. So I'm happy for them that they were able to do it. The WCC is now temporarily a 12-team league for this upcoming season, with Gonzaga, Washington State, and Oregon State in the conference alongside Seattle U and the other returners. It'll be a 12-team league. So they get to enjoy being a 12-team league. That's fun. The next year, they will be a 9-team league because, of course, Gonzaga, Wazoo, and Oregon State will all leave to help form the new look Pac-12 conference. So it'll drop to a 9-team league. That's assuming no other changes. That may not be the case. St. Mary's, of course, angling for a spot in the Pac-12. We're going to talk about that more later this week. But for right now, that is still something St. Mary's is trying to make happen. We'll see if the Pac-12 ultimately decides to add a basketball-only member, or a non-football member, I should say, and bringing in the Gales. And then also the WCC could make additions. They could sit tight at 9 and hope they don't drop to 8, but they could also try to be proactive and bringing in somebody else. I thought that they missed out on two very obvious targets in my mind in Cal Baptist and Utah Valley, who are both members of the WAC, who have now since joined the Big West. I thought those would have been quality additions for the WCC that they were unable to make happen. There's still some other options out there they could potentially pursue, but it's something to keep an eye on. Not that it really impacts Gonzaga much, because nothing's going to change in the short term this upcoming season. And after that, Gonzaga won't have to think about the WCC anymore. I will still root for the conference, as I'm affiliated with Seattle U as well. But I'm thinking that this is something that, again, it's not going to matter to Gonzaga all that much. What does matter is that Gonzaga will play Seattle U twice this year, once at home, once on the road. And if you're thinking, how on earth did Seattle U manage to get Gonzaga to play them at their home arena for the only season they're together? It's because Seattle U's part-time home arena is the Climate Pledge Arena. And I am willing to bet pretty much everything that I have that Gonzaga will not be playing Seattle U at the Red Hawk Center, which is on Seattle U's campus, and I think seats 1,500. It might be 1,000. It does not seat more than 1,500. That I will promise you. So there's a virtually 0.0% chance that Gonzaga is going to play a true road game at an arena that sits 1,500. They're going to play that road game at Climate Pledge Arena, and it is not going to be a road game for Gonzaga. It is going to overwhelmingly be a home game. In fact, I will say this with 100% confidence. There will be more Gonzaga fans at the Climate Pledge Arena when Gonzaga takes on Seattle U than there will be at the Kennel when Gonzaga plays Seattle U at home. I almost guarantee that will be the case. So Gonzaga's got basically 2 home games against Seattle U this year. Again, Seattle U does have a history of basketball success and some recent success. Again, not that this particularly matters for the current state of affairs, but worth pointing out, Seattle U made the NCAA tournament 11 times between 1953 and 1969. Yes, less teams made the tournament. There were less teams, blah, 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 whatever caveats you want to toss on it. They still made the tournament 11 years out of 16. That is very impressive. They were ranked in the AP poll in 9 of those seasons, as high as number 4. They also went to a national championship game. In 1958, Seattle U lost to Kentucky in the national championship game. Elgin Baylor, who went on to have a Hall of Fame career with the Los Angeles Lakers, was on that Seattle U team. He had 25 points and 19 boards in the loss for Seattle against the Kentucky Wildcats way back in 1958. Now, of course, Seattle U shortly after that dropped out of the D1 level, so they didn't have any more opportunities. Since they've returned to D1 in 2009, they have not made the NCAA tournament. They have had plenty of success in the WAC, though. Coach Chris Victor has taken over and has been there for 4 years and has won 20 or more games in 3 of those 4 years. His first season, they went 23-9, 14-4 in the WAC, but they lost to Abilene Christian in the WAC semifinals. 20-12 the next year, and then 23-14 the year after that. But they lost to Grand Canyon in the semifinals and quarterfinals of those 2 tournaments. And then in 2024, after losing in the semifinals to Grand Canyon, Seattle U got an invitation to the CBI and went out and won the whole thing. The teams they beat were Delaware State, Evansville, Fairfield, and then High Point in the championship game. By the way, that High Point roster featured Duke Miles, which, if that name sounds familiar, Gonzaga pursued him heavily in the transfer portal this year. He was originally at Oklahoma last year, but he was at High Point and was part of that team that Seattle U beat in the CBI championship in 2024. The Seattle U team has Jun-Suk Yo on the roster. As a reminder, it'll be very fun when Gonzaga plays Seattle U twice this year that Gonzaga fans will get to see Jun-Suk Yo after he spent 2.5 seasons in Spokane with the Zags, but never really carved out a significant role. Not a surprise to see him at the transfer portal. I'm very happy for him and excited to see what he's capable of doing for this Red Hawks team. Seattle U also added a center from Grand Canyon and Austin Maurer, who was one of the best high school players in the state of Oregon prior to an injury-riddled freshman year with the Lopes. And then they added a transfer from Southern Utah University power forward Brock Felder, and they have a strong incoming freshman class as well. Excited to see what the Seattle U team can do. I have a rooted interest in Seattle U. Obviously, I've not hidden that, but certainly excited to see what they add to this conference. I do believe that they have the ability, if they really allocate their resources towards their basketball programs. And Seattle U is a very successful soccer program, men's and women's. They've had success on the baseball diamond as well. Shout out Cy Young winner and best pitcher on the planet, Tarek Skubal, for the Detroit Tigers, who went to Seattle U and was there when I was working there. Jansen Junk pitches for the Miami Marlins. He was also part of that same recruiting class for Seattle U's baseball team. Fun facts for you there. They are going to add some nice baseball to the WCC as well. But I think this is a good addition. It makes sense geographically. It makes sense institutionally. Seattle U belongs in the WCC when you consider that San Diego, LA, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, the biggest cities on the West Coast. There are Jesuit affiliated schools in every single one of those cities, and every one of them was in the WCC except Seattle U until now. That is a right that has been, or a wrong that has been righted, and I'm happy to see this for them going forward. And I also understand why Gonzaga fans might be like, I'm happy that Gonzaga is leaving because Seattle U is not an addition that moves the needle for them. That is a perfectly legitimate way to feel. And Gonzaga is in a much better situation from a competitive basketball perspective and from a financial perspective, being in the Pac-12 starting next year. But I'm glad there's 1 year of overlap here where we get to see these matchups happen, both at home and also at home for Gonzaga. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Also give a special shout out here to those everyday listeners and those of you who are subscribed on YouTube. If you're not, just hit that little bell. It'll get you subscribed. It'll get you notified whenever there's new shows coming out. We'll be back later this week. We got more coming your way on conference realignment, more on recruiting, more on scheduling, more on anything that's coming up here. Summer league's around the corner as well. All that stuff here. Don't miss a show. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And of course, as always, go Zags.